hear my cry for truth, my cry for truth, my cry for you.
Hello and welcome. I am Marc Lambert here at Liberty Hill, where I am pastor. At home, I am husband to my wife, father to my children, and to everyone around me, an example that God does indeed choose the weak and foolish things of the world for his purposes. We've got a good show coming up, conversation with Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity. More on that in a second. First, I want to take an opportunity to plug a Christian apologetics ministry out there called The Mentionables. You can check them out at their website, thementionables.org. This is a group of small-time speakers, apologists, bloggers, podcasters, writers who dedicate their time to defending the truth of Christianity, and they have teamed up in order to amplify their impact. I'm honored to be a part of their network. There are several of them, of us, spread across the country, and so if you could use some sort of apologetics speaker or presenter, debater of that sort, something of that kind, you can check them out at thementionables.org. They also have their first national conference coming up May 18th and 19th in, I believe, Greensboro, North Carolina. There will be more details on that after the show. I also want to go ahead and mention we recently had our first question and answer event of 2018. Look for the videos of that to be rolling out here soon in the weeks to come on the website, heypastor.org. You can also check out past episodes of this podcast. Now, as we get into this episode, we're talking with Cameron Bertuzzi. Those of Liberty Hill who remember him, he came and spoke on the historical case for the resurrection a couple Easters ago. We were glad to have him. Look forward to having him back in our pulpit. But in the meantime, I had a conversation with Cameron about a topic that's not a specific question someone asked so much as me anticipating some questions that might arise. There is a growing movement among atheists and skeptics called Street Epistemology, and its approach can sometimes be a little misleading, I think, not intentional necessarily on the part of the person. However, if you're not aware of what is going on, the questions and the method they use might catch you unawares. Cameron has done quite a bit of study on this topic, so I thought I would bring him on to have a conversation about street epistemology, what it is, and how we, as followers of Christ, can be prepared for whenever we encounter these kinds of questions. So with no further ado, let's have a talk with Cameron.
I want to know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I want to know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
All right. Well, thank you, Cameron, for agreeing to come on and have this conversation. Whenever the book came out that started Street Epistemology, we can mention that in a minute, I basically rolled my eyes at it and just dismissed it because it just seemed so ridiculous. But now, fast forward, and it actually seems to be gaining some steam. And I know that you have done some research and digging into more so than I have. So I'm really glad to have you on. So for those who don't know who you are, let's just give a brief who's Cameron and let you plug Capturing Christianity and the good work you do there. So introduce yourself, Cameron.
Well, Marc, thank you for having me on. So I'm Cameron, and I'm a professional photographer. The way that I kind of got into these questions about the rationality of Christianity and philosophy, apologetics, all that stuff was a few years ago. My brother came out as an atheist, and we had grown up Christians. So this took me by surprise. I didn't really know how to respond to it. I met up with him. We had a really, really long conversation. It got heated. And I noticed that my responses to his questions weren't very good. So after that, it sent me on this journey to discover whether or not there actually were good reasons to think that Christianity was true. And so on this journey, what I found actually really shocked me. I didn't really expect to find all of these intellectual arguments, these sophisticated arguments in defense of the truth of Christianity and the existence of God. I did not expect to find what I found. And so that led me to start my ministry called Capturing Christianity, where I'm hoping to expose these the stuff that I found to just the general public. And so a few months ago, I was just on Facebook and I don't know where I was, but I saw this video of a street epistemologist talking with a Christian, and they were talking about, I think, the evidence for Christianity. And it took me a little by surprise in the sense that I, like you, when I first heard of street epistemology years ago, when I listened to that podcast on Unbelievable, it was between Tim McGrew, who is a Christian philosopher, and Peter Boghossian, who is the author of the book A Manual for Creating Atheists. He's the founder of street epistemology. When I heard that interview, that back and forth, it didn't really strike me as something, like you said, that was going to take off or be a very serious challenge to Christian belief. And so I dismissed it as well. I didn't really think about it too much. And then come to find out a few years later, there's there's a few individuals on YouTube that have these YouTube channels with, actually some of them have thousands of followers right now. And so when I discovered this and I saw this interview between, the Christian's name is Jonathan McClatchy. He's another Christian apologist, which he actually has some really interesting videos that listeners might want to check out as well, with a street epistemologist. When I saw those, it sort of got me interested. And so I picked up Boghossian's book. I read through it and found very, very little that I could agree with. And so I just started to post about it and post my thoughts on it and things that I saw wrong or flawed with the method itself. And that's basically taken me to where I am today. Whereas, I mean, it doesn't occupy all of my time. Obviously, there's a whole range of other topics that I'm interested in apologetics. But as of late, this has been one thing that's been sort of at the forefront, just reading through the materials, watching interviews from street epistemologists on YouTube, which actually there are some differences between where the movement is today and where Peter Boghossian originally founded it with his book. So, okay. So yeah, that's a brief overview.
Okay. You said that you've written some stuff and some things on your research and what you found about it. Where would folks go to see that?
So Capturing Christianity is a website that you can go to, and it's really where I do all my blogging. I post discussions that I have between Christians and non-Christian that I host on YouTube. I post all of my work there. And so I've posted, I don't even know how many articles at this point on the topic of street epistemology. I've written one actually where I had a conversation with a street epistemologist. We had a written dialogue where I wanted to do a written dialogue mainly because, for me at least, when I'm in a discussion with somebody else on a topic like this, I don't know. I felt a little bit more comfortable in a situation where I can slow down and really think about my responses, really think about what they're saying, make sure that neither of us are talking past each other, that we were making sure, like I said, that we were addressing each other's questions and concerns. And so I wanted to do this written dialogue, which if you want to go and read that, that's on my website as well. After that, I wrote an article, How to Respond to Street Epistemology, which basically breaks down their 4 most common questions that they ask in an interview, or as Peter Boghossian calls them, interventions. The 4 most common questions that they ask, I've written responses, how I suggest Christians should respond to those. And then I've also written articles on like the question of religious diversity and Christianity as wish fulfillment. These are common themes that you find in street epistemology. So I've written on those topics. And yeah, that's where you can go to find them, Capturing Christianity, and they're going to be pretty easy to find if you just search for them.
Okay, yeah. Along with the live discussions that you've had, those were great. And you've started your own podcast now. And so good stuff. Looking forward to what keeps coming out. Now, we've thrown around this term street epistemology. For those who don't know, can you just give like a brief definition of what that is?
Yeah, so why don't I actually just give the definition that Boghossian gives in his book. I'll do that first. He says, quote, "The goal of this book is to create a generation of street epistemologists, people equipped with an array of dialectical and clinical tools who actively go into the streets, the prisons, the bars, the churches, the schools, and the community, into any and every place the faithful reside, and help them abandon their faith and embrace reason." That's on page 1 of his book.
So atheist evangelists.
It is in Boghossian's view, it's atheistic evangelism. Now, street epistemologists today are attempting to distance themselves from that view. They claim now it's really just about truth, or maybe even just about gathering all this data of what Christians or other people that have these wacky beliefs, what they believe and why, because they want to introduce critical thinking into society or something along those lines. But that's the way that Boghossian defines it. And there's a complete street epistemology guide online. I actually have it posted on my website as well. And they say that street epistemology is a movement to apply the tools of philosophy in everyday conversations in order to encourage people to use reliable ways of forming beliefs. That's the way that they define it.
Okay. And so their approach basically is asking questions. That it is they try to explore your beliefs through the use of questions, trying to sow seeds of doubt, I guess might be one way of looking at it.
Right, you're asking questions, but there are a few other things that are going on. One of them, and I mentioned this earlier, Boghossian views these interactions as what are called interventions. And so basically what he says is that you're treating the Christian or the believer as almost like you would a drug addict. And so you can't go into these discussions berating them or just beating them over the head with reason. You've got to approach them in a cordial manner. You've got to build rapport. First of all, you've got to make sure that they get a sense that you're on their side. You're just working together toward this goal together. Yeah. So in addition to asking questions, there's this other sort of rhetorical, dialectical side of it where you're using cordiality and just being nice to them. That plays a crucial role in the method. So it's about asking questions, but it's also about being nice. And there's issues that we can talk about there, but
okay.
Yeah.
What would you say? We have some specifics that we're going to get into here in a little bit, but what would you say, just in general, might be a flaw or a problem with this approach?
So I categorize my problems with street epistemology into two major categories. So on the one hand, there are methodological problems that I've found, and this talks about things like there's a sense in which this method might be a little manipulative, because in my experience, most atheists, before they encountered street epistemology, they were having these discussions where they were getting heated. They were just your stereotypical angry internet atheist, and this obviously doesn't apply to every atheist out there, but there's the stereotype exists for a reason. But a lot of these atheists were just angry, and they had these conversations with Christians and believers, and they weren't going the way that they really wanted them to go. And so they came across this new method, street epistemology, that allowed them to actually do what they wanted to do originally, but now they found this new method that does it better. And so it can be taken as sort of manipulative. So instead of actually loving the person that they're talking with and being respectful because this is another human being with intrinsic moral worth, instead of looking at it that way, it's like, well, I'm just going to be nice to this person so I can convince them to abandon their belief. And when you look at it that way, you can see that it could be seen as manipulative. And this doesn't mean that it's true of every street epistemologist. I'm sure that there are some out there who are genuinely nice people and who love others and just want them to come to the truth and that kind of thing. But I think in many cases, if not most, there is an element of manipulation that's going on. So that's on the one hand, that's the methodological problem. And there are others that I have, but that's one of the biggest ones.
Okay.
And then the second category is epistemology. And so these are, they call themselves street epistemologists, and epistemology is basically just the study of knowledge. And it's really an academic pursuit. So what they sort of assume when they go into these conversations is that their way of knowing is the right way of knowing. And that's an issue because these people are not professional epistemologists. They haven't really done much research into epistemology. They're essentially just going in with these assumptions about some really complicated topics in academia and in epistemology that they don't really have any business doing. And so that's on the epistemological side. That's one of the biggest issues, or probably the biggest issue that I have. And each of these can be broken down and explained. I mean, we could do that for hours, but those are the two basic categories of flaws that I see.
Okay. Now there are some, there's a progression kind of to the way that they do their thing, and I don't know, we could talk about the way that kind of builds or whatever if you wanted to, but then there's some specific, well, what I've seen in my interaction and what I've looked into, which hasn't been as much as you are or you have, but there seems to be a few kind of types of questions that your average churchgoer, your average Christian probably hadn't given a lot of thought to, and so might catch them unawares, and which is probably why this can be effective in creating doubt, why it is pursued, but these actually aren't really good reasons to doubt. And so I figured we just kind of go through these one by one and kind of, so that way people have an awareness. So if they encounter a street epistemologist or just this kind of question in general from somebody, that it doesn't have to catch them off guard and make them have some existential crisis because they don't know the answer. Kind of build their confidence in their own faith. So anything else you want to say before we jump into those?
Yeah, let me just say a couple things. So these questions that they ask, they're not all bad questions. Some of them are actually really, really good questions. And they're so good that philosophers don't even really, well, I won't say that they don't know the answers, but philosophers disagree. And they investigate these questions like, okay, so here's one. So do we start out knowing some things, or do we have to have an account of what knowledge is first? That's a question that philosophers disagree about and investigate and write about and publish articles on and all that kind of stuff. And so these questions actually work their way into these discussions. And so in some cases, if these questions seem difficult, it's because in some cases they just are difficult. And so it's no wonder that they're going to perplex the average person when they also perplex professional philosophers. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that some of these questions are actually genuinely good questions, and it's going to take a bit of research and knowledge and understanding and how to answer them. So you might not, even through this conversation, you're not going to have all the tools that you need to answer every question that you're going to be asked, but that's just reason to go in and investigate for yourself and look into apologetics and look into the reasons that other Christians have given in defense of Christianity. Look into Christian epistemology, or what's called religious epistemology. Look into these subjects for yourself. And so secondly, and I've already mentioned this, but keep in mind that these street epistemologists are not actually epistemologists. They haven't, the vast majority, if not all of them, haven't even picked up a single book on the subject, and especially not a Christian book talking about religious epistemology. Their training materials actually focus on the psychology of belief rather than on epistemology. And so they're really in no position to disparage your reasons for belief in God. There's really very, very little in way of them having actually good reasons to think that your reasons aren't very good. So keep that in mind when you're engaging in these conversations, is that even though you might not have a good answer, that doesn't mean that the answer that you gave is not a good one.
And one thing that I've kind of noticed, and this may not be true of all of them, probably isn't, but they're kind of, it's like the method itself is just to say, to get to a point where it says, that's not a good reason to believe, and they just leave it. It doesn't actually try to get to what is a good belief, what is a good reason to believe, what is the truth, right? They say they're trying to examine people's beliefs to see if they're, rightly held, if they're believing true things, but the method itself doesn't get at truth. It just creates doubt, which may or may not be, founded.
Yeah, I think that's right. They want to instill doubt, and then they don't actually offer any case or reason to think that either position is true. And I think this might be coupled with the fact that they're the kind of atheist who thinks that atheism is just a lack of belief. And so if you can get someone to start doubting, then you can start to begin creating atheists, because atheism is really just about lacking a belief in any religion or any God. And so that might be the way that they're sort of approaching it. But the traditional understanding of what the term atheism means is that it actually is a belief. It's a belief that God does not exist, or that no God exists. Right. But if that's the way that atheism should be looked at, then at most what they would be doing then is creating agnostics. They wouldn't be creating atheists in the traditional sense. They'd be creating agnostics. And so they wouldn't be saying that this way, or they wouldn't be saying that atheism is true, or that theism is false, or that theism is true, or whatever. Some of them, even in conversation, have mentioned that street epistemology could lead to the belief that theism is true. That's something that they're open to. So, yeah, who knows?
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's.
Well, let's get into these points, because these are things that some of these are actually specific things that J. Warner Wallace brought up here at Liberty Hill. We recently, last year, did the study Forensic Faith by J. Warner Wallace. And one of the points he starts out with is saying that if you ask your average Christian, why do you believe this? They give answers that a lot of them are actually the kind of answers that street epistemologists are going after to say that's bad, that's a reason to doubt. So I think your average Christian, these were things that kind of jumped out at me to say, that these are things that might stumble your average churchgoer who maybe hasn't, given a lot of thought to this. Because face it, we're working jobs, maybe 2 jobs, paying bills, taking care of kids, and all kinds of things. When do we have time to sit down with a philosophy book, and figure this stuff out? And so I just want to maybe try to give some sort of help that someone could at least, stay confident. Even if they don't know the answer, they can at least, have their defenses shored up to where they can say, wait a minute, that's not a good reason to doubt. And so let's go through these. Some common ones, some common approaches that I've heard. They'll ask a question, like someone will say, they believe the Bible, or because the Bible said so, or because it's God's word, or because they had an experience, with God. And the street epistemologist will say something like, well, but other people from other religions make that same claim. So why is yours the right one? So something of that sort.
Right. So let me just reiterate that today we'll only really be scratching the surface on these questions. When when I provide answers or whatever, don't think that this is everything that there is to it. So one way that we can respond to this, and a way that Christians have often responded, is to say that, well, Christianity in particular has very, very good arguments and evidence in support of it. And I actually agree that there is surprisingly good evidence for the specific truth of Christianity. And now, people are going to disagree on that. A Muslim apologist is going to disagree. They're going to say that, well, no, Christianity doesn't have good reasons in defense of it. It's really just Islam that has good reasons. But this takes us to a theory in epistemology that is called equal weight theory. And so what this basically says is that when 2 people disagree about some claim, then all that we can do at that point is to just revert to skepticism. So suppose that we have like 5 Christians, 5 non-Christians in a room. They all disagree. They all have access to the same evidence. And so the only rational thing for them to do at this point is to give up belief. The non-Christians should give up belief in whatever they believe. The Christians should give up belief in whatever they believe. And so one of the problems with this view is the view itself might actually be self-defeating. And, it's not a case of might be self-defeating. I think it is actually self-defeating. And here's what that means. So this view itself, equal weight theory, is not something that everybody accepts. Not everybody accepts equal weight theory. But if then that's the case, if we have 2 people in a room, one of them agrees with equal weight theory, one of them disagrees with equal weight theory, then the correct response is to give up belief in equal weight theory. So this view itself is not a very good reason to abandon our original belief. And so if we have a Christian in a room, we have a non-Christian, we have a Hindu, a Muslim, or whatever, the appropriate response is not always to just abandon belief or just to revert to skepticism. That doesn't follow. It really only follows if we assume this thing called equal weight theory, which itself, like I said, is self-defeating. So this is not a very good reason to abandon belief. And let me just give one other reason here. So there's a difference between having a justification for a belief and, on the other hand, knowing what is actually the case. Or not knowing is probably the wrong term here. So let me just put it like this. So when someone asks, or when a street epistemologist asks, does just believing in something give you knowledge? Or if a Muslim came up and told me that they believe in Allah because of faith, how would we determine which belief is true? This is a very, very common question that you get. It's a variation of the one that you gave. Here's the way that I suggest you respond. It's a little like asking if my intuition that other minds exist determines or makes it the case that other minds exist. But these sort of intuitions or seemings, the way that something seems to me, this was never intended to operate like that. My intuition or my experience, my religious experience that Christianity is true doesn't determine that God exists or that Christianity is true, but it can be used to justify my belief in God. And so some people don't like this response because they don't want to admit that the Mormon or that the Muslim can be justified in their belief. They don't want to admit that. But I don't really see any reason to reject that. I mean, I think these people can be justified in their belief on the basis of their personal experience. But what we'd want to do at that point is if we want to go beyond just sort of this personal justification, beyond that, we want to actually look into the arguments and evidence, and I have nothing against that. I think that we should be looking into the arguments, the specific evidences in support of Christianity. Like I said, I think there's really, really good, strong reason to think that Christianity is true. So I don't know if that helps, but that's the sort of way that I would approach that question.
Okay, yeah. I think it is helpful for us to realize that, being justified in believing something is a separate question from its being true or not.
Right. That's what I meant earlier when I was saying being justified is different than knowing it's true. What I meant to say is that being justified is a separate question from is something true. And so we can have justification. We can even have justification for false beliefs.
Right. And, we see this in other areas. If you remove it from the religious arena, it's a common phrase, don't judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. Right. So someone could be wrong, but you don't understand where they're coming from. Right. It's a very common idea that gets passed around. But whenever it comes to religious things, oh, no, can't do that. It just has to be
right. Well, here's a really easy to understand example of something that could be a justified false belief. So before we had evidence that the earth was round, most people had the belief that the earth was flat. Now this we believe as living in today's contemporary society, we believe that this is a false belief. Nevertheless, anyone who hasn't been presented the evidence of a round earth is going to be justified in believing that the earth is flat. So that's one way that you could look at this, that your experience, your own personal experience provides some level of justification, but that doesn't mean that belief is true. It just means that you have some justification for believing it.
Right. Just real quick, this is probably a really bad example. It's going to make me look like an idiot. Years ago, I was delivering pizza, and I was delivering in a rough neighborhood. And I'm surprised they even let us deliver there. But I come walking from a house back to the car, and there's three guys come walking towards me, and they look like they are straight out of a gangster movie. It's like stereotype almost. And here I am, this scrawny little 20-year-old, at night all alone on a dark street with these three big thug-looking guys walking up to me. And so what do I believe is probably about to happen? Right? I believe, oh no, I'm probably about to get jumped or robbed or something. In that area of town, that would not be an founded assumption. I'm carrying cash on me. They would know this, so that's, would make sense. Of course, they walk up and then they start asking me, hey, how much is a pizza? What specials do you have? Are there any good deals going on? That kind of stuff. So, but at the moment, here come some guys who, everything that my culture and thinking tells me, here's what, bad guys look like. I'm in a bad part of town. I have money. I'm all alone, dark street. It would make sense that someone would feel, oh no, I'm in danger. when in that reality, I really wasn't in danger. There was no danger. I don't know. Maybe that was just a horrible example. Maybe I should move on before I embarrass myself more.
No, I think it expresses the same idea, is that we can have a justification for a belief even if that belief is false. Yeah, I think that that's true. I don't really see any reason that we shouldn't hold something like that. Let me just make another quick point here. Religious experience provides a kind of what's termed non-transferable justification. It's a personal justification. I can't transfer my experiences to someone else. I can't transfer, for instance, I can't transfer my memory of what I ate for breakfast to you. I can't transfer any of my conscious experiences to anybody. But I mean, that doesn't mean that, what I believe on the basis of my experience is false or unjustified. It just means that I can't transfer that to anybody else. So there's two different kinds of evidence, if we want to look at it that way. There's the type of evidence that's available only to me, which is my conscious experience. But then there's also a kind of propositional or an evidential kind of evidence that is available to everybody. And so we often just assume, or I don't think we often assume this, I think it gets assumed that the only type of evidence that's legitimate is the second type, which is the empirical or scientific or whatever kind of evidence. But I think that the personal experience and my own conscious experiences, I think that evidence is actually really good evidence, and it can be better evidence in some cases. So yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Well, and you keep throwing out the E word, evidence, and I think that's one thing that this question just kind of shoots right past and ignores. I think this falls into that atheist assumption that all religions are just wishful thinking. It's just all, made up fairy tale faith kind of stuff. If someone says, oh, well, you say your holy book is reliable. Well, the Muslim says that his holy book is reliable. But that's apples and oranges, because they have different manuscript evidence. They have different historical reliability. They have, the comparison of the two are completely different. And so whenever you dig into by what standard do we determine a text is reliable, their measures on that is going to be completely different. So just to say that you both claim it doesn't actually mean that there's any reason to think, for that to create any kind of doubt.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, so I think that's probably a good place to segue into the second question. Because, if we stop and think, well, okay, but wait a minute, we have evidence for our belief. A common thing that I have heard, I say common like I just see it all over the place. I haven't had as much interaction with street epistemologists as some. A question that's been placed to me, let me put it that way, is that if there is all of this evidence for your belief, then why is it that so many other people don't see it? If there's all this evidence and it's so obvious, why don't other people believe it too?
Well, the first thing I would want to say is, I think there is a lot of people that believe in Christianity. There's billions of people. But that let's put that aside. So here's another similar kind of question that we could ask. Well, if there's so much evidence for a round Earth, why do flat earthers not see it? Or if there's so much evidence for equal rights, why don't people living in Saudi Arabia see it? The answer to these questions, I don't know. We don't always know why people don't come to the same conclusions as us. I don't know what we can draw from this, like rationally or logically. What follows from that? It's just a question that you might wonder about, but that doesn't. It doesn't entail that Christian belief is unjustified or false or anything like that. And here's one explanation that Christians give, or that the Bible gives, and that it's a very simple question. It's sin. Is that the reason why people don't believe in Christianity or in God is due to something like sin. They just they want to do their own thing. They are in rebellion against God, and right. That's the explanation. You might not like that explanation, but that's the one that Christians give, and that's the one that the Bible gives. So,
it's a very unpopular answer among unbelievers.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though. So sin really works on the subconscious level a lot in a lot of cases. No one. Maybe there are people who go out and just consciously sin all the time, but sin operates a lot on the subconscious level. And so we can be sinning and not be consciously aware of it. And so the person who denies that could be doing it sincerely, but They just wouldn't be aware of the fact that it's due to a subconscious desire to sin. And so that's actually compatible. So someone saying that, oh, well, no, that doesn't apply to me, that's actually compatible with the view or with the theory itself, because that's exactly what you would expect someone to say.
Yeah, and there's some who
subconsciously in sin.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's some who have flat out admitted it. There's been some popular atheists who have said, I don't want there to be a God because I don't want someone telling me what to do. I don't want there to be an all-powerful being peeking into my bedroom. I want to do whatever I want to do and not have to answer to him. I mean, some of them have flat out said it. Right? So we know it's at least the case for some. And I think one thing that also gets into this, I would say, as I've been kind of reflecting on this, our filters through which we accept or dismiss evidence and kind of see, add up to form our beliefs, get filtered through things that are deeply seated in our way of thinking, the things that we don't even understand. This is one reason why Christian parents tried so hard to keep secular, atheist, materialistic kind of thinking from being ingrained in their children. An interesting, and this is just anecdotal, but every atheist who used to be a Christian that I've ever talked to, who have told me their journey from Christianity to being an atheist, they will admit, or at least I see it in the progression of their story, that by the time they stopped believing, they had already years before adopted a naturalistic point of view, so that any evidence for Christianity that isn't materialistic, naturalistic, science, kind of empirical evidence isn't going to count. And so I think some of it, hey, if there's all this evidence, why don't people see it? Well, I think part of it is they're conditioned to not see it.
If anyone is really, really determined, you can deny pretty much anything you want to deny. It doesn't matter how much evidence you give in support of it. I mean, there are conspiracy theorists all over the place who deny all sorts of things. And I mean, you could explain that by just that's what they want to believe. So, I mean, the fact that some piece of evidence isn't universally convincing everybody who is alive, to me, not a whole lot follows.
And I think it's complex. Human beings are complex. I don't think there's any one answer to this question. All right. Think we about got that one sewed up?
Hear me now, Lord, I'm calling for you to find me here, to find me here. Hear me now, Lord, I'm calling for you to find you near, to find you here.
Okay, well, that seems like a great place to stop right there for now. We will pick this up in part 2 of this conversation. Look for that episode to be released sometime in the middle of February. Also, if you have a question that you would like featured on this podcast, you can go to the website at heypastor.org. There's a submission form there on the website. You can also check out past episodes, Q&A videos as those roll out. Also, sermon excerpts that answer questions that people might have. All sorts of resources there available for you at the heypastor.org website. Also, as promised, here's a little blurb about the Mentionables National Conference coming up May 18th and 19th in Greensboro, North Carolina. I don't know if any of our Texas folks will be able to go or interested in that. However, I know that this podcast does have reach beyond our little corner of Texas. And so if you're interested in that, here is more information about the Mentionables Conference coming up in May.
They are a small grassroots team of apologetics speakers, each of whom has their own small grassroots ministry. Then one day they had an idea. It started almost as a joke, but quickly ballooned into a full-fledged ministry plan. Gathered together as bloggers, podcasters, vloggers, and writers, each with their own small voice, but drowned out and passed over by the grandeur of celebrity apologists. From the eastern seaboard to the west coast and various locations in between, they come from different backgrounds, but they share one great message. This journey of these thinkers, each with his own small influence in some small corner of the Christian apologetics world, will finally converge in one location. They will meet one another for the very first time. This is a team of speakers like no other. Among them is a man who has struggled against seizures and brain surgery, and yet has remained brilliant in his defense of the gospel. A former atheist whose conversion to Christianity now has him battling the worldview he once held. A former gospel rapper whose ministry on behalf of urban believers fights for racial reconciliation. An elementary school teacher who strives to make apologetics accessible to the everyman. And finally, a man with Asperger's syndrome married to a woman with Asperger's syndrome. His passion, along with apologetics, is to keep the church informed on matters of how to minister to the autistic brothers and sisters in their midst, and of the treasure that his unconventional marriage has been to him. In May of 2018, the group, now known as the Mentionables, will hold its very first national conference in Greensboro, North Carolina. This unusual group, the Mentionables, which came together almost by accident, now invite you to join them. Come see their messages united. Come see what small voices can do to present one loud noise for the kingdom. Join us for Mentionable, the Conference 2018. For more information, visit the Mentionables Facebook group page or contact Greensboro Christian Church at 336-621-5226. Mentionable, the Conference. Many small voices present one big message.